Hello and welcome to the C3 Method Patreon Weekly Q&A with your host, Robert Polenic. Our goal is to educate you on everything health and fitness related with a clear, concise, and customized approach. We want you to know what you need to know and how to apply it in a way that fits you best. This is the Patreon Weekly Q&A for the week of June 2nd, 2025. The questions that are going to be featured in our Q&A today are from our Patreon members. If you'd like to be able to submit questions for this Q&A, you can sign up for Patreon at patreon.com/C3 method. And the 3 is spelled out T-H-R-E-E. So C-T-H-R-E-E method. And that's how you can find us. You can also find on our Patreon channel, we have nutrition education videos, training education videos, training programs, and I'm going to be adding more and more to those all the time. So that's the goal, is basically a library of educational videos that will grow over time and grow along with the suggestions and the direction given from the Patreon members. My intent of it is to provide access to me, my knowledge, the programming that we offer, the nutrition approach that we use, and offer all of that at a lower than our typical one-on-one type cost, and be able to offer it in a way that can still be personalized. The clear, concise, and customized concept of C3 method. I really want that customized part. I think that's one of the main components that is missing in the world of social media today. There's a lot of information available, but it's really hard to know of that information what applies best to you, or how to apply the information that's presented best to you. So that's what I want to be able to do with the customized aspect of our services. Now, we're going to get into this week's questions, but we did have just a general question that I wanted to approach. Somebody asked if we had an email specific just for Patreon questions. They had sent me an email to my personal email address, and they wondered if that was the best way to go about it. My answer in general is, however you get the question to me, I'm happy that you did, and I hope then that you're getting the answer you want. On Patreon itself, the first post on our community page, our kind of like channels page, is titled questions. So you can just open that and submit your question there. You can also send direct messages, which is kind of like sending emails on Patreon itself. You can then reach out if you'd like on any of the videos. In the comment section, paid members can leave comments and you can put a question in there if you'd like. You can also email me at c3method@gmail.com. And again, the 3 is spelled out. So C-T-H-R-E-E method@gmail.com. So any of the ways you do it is great. I would, what's easiest for me, if you have a concern about that, is to put them on Patreon itself, or email me at c3method@gmail.com. That would be the most convenient ways for me. If you put it in a comment section of a video, I do get notifications, and then I have to kind of like copy and paste it and make sure I don't forget it by the next week's videos. But anywhere on Patreon is great, or our email is great as well. So thank you for asking about that. Thank you for wanting to know the best way to submit the questions, but truthfully, I'm just happy you submit them. As long as you're using the service, as long as you're happy, that makes me happy. Now we'll get into this week's questions. As usual, we have nutrition, training, mindset, and business. I'd be open to any topic, but these tend to be the kind of 4 main topics that most questions fall into. So let's go ahead and read through those questions. What is your take on this carnivore diet? One of our friends on the ship with us, one of my clients is on a cruise. So that is what they're referring to as the ship. So again, one of our friends on the ship is with us, and he is ripped, but also 160 pounds. And everyone is asking me why I'm not ripped or why I don't have abs. And my answer was that I'm like 100 pounds bigger than him and that he fasts. And he fasts, then only eats between a certain window. So he is basically on a calorie deficit all the time. So essentially what they're wondering is the carnivore diet. This is actually kind of a mix of things. So apparently this person is doing the carnivore diet plus mixing in intermittent fasting. So there's a couple layers there. And then my client is not doing that. They're a competitive bodybuilder, so we do eat a lot of carbohydrates, and they're in their off season. They're trying to actually build muscle mass, so we're going to be in a little bit of a caloric surplus. So they're comparing themselves to this other person. So the other person's much leaner, but they're also a lot smaller in regards to muscle mass, and they're in different kind of seasons of life. This client is in an off-season growth phase, and it sounds like the other person was in a let me get shredded for this cruise phase, which is great. And they're just wondering, I guess, the difference in this friend who's doing carnivore and intermittent fasting, the difference between that and our approach, which would be considered more of a bodybuilder off-season type of diet, to where we do allow carbohydrates. So for example, a carnivore diet is mostly just meats and dietary fats. They might, depending on the way they're defining carnivore, they might allow vegetables and fruit. So they might have a small amount of carbohydrates, but it'd be a very low carbohydrate diet. Whereas the client doing the bodybuilding off season is going to be more on what we consider a high carbohydrate diet. So what's the difference between those two? And then they're also throwing in intermittent fasting with that carnivore diet. There's a lot to unpack there. Let's look at the general overview. Is if I'm looking at this and the person might be wondering a little bit of why are they doing one thing when their friend is seeing great results doing this other thing? But then they're saying that everybody is asking questions about these two different approaches, and they're a little confused as to maybe how to answer that. A couple things I would point out is that the individuals have different goals. So one person is eating to build muscle, the other person is eating, I'm assuming, to be very lean. Otherwise, I don't know why in the world they'd be doing carnivore plus intermittent fasting. If they're trying to build mass, there are easier ways to do it than trying to combine those two things together. But they're likely going to be doing that to stay lean and have good performance, but they're mostly going to be looking at trying to be lean and muscular and strong, and that's why they're doing the carnivore diet blended with intermittent fasting. And then my client is trying to build muscle mass, and we're trying to build muscle mass with very minimal body fat gain, but we can't limit all body fat gain entirely, because then we would impair our goal of building muscle mass. So we want to build as much muscle mass optimally as we can while allowing the minimalist amount of body fat to be formed. So the two people are just in completely different seasons of life. They have different goals with their diet, so it would make sense then that the diets would be different. So that's one thing to consider is if you're looking at one diet structure versus another diet structure, well, what's the intended goal? Some diet structures are going to be better towards the goal of building muscle while minimal body fat gains, and other diets might be better towards losing body fat, which would be an example of why that person would be doing a carnivore diet, which is a restrictive style diet, because you're eliminating almost all carbohydrates as a way to control calorie intake, and then they're furthering calorie intake control by doing intermittent fasting. So there's a lot of limitations they have on that diet, the way in which they're eating, in order to control calories. So they're driving a caloric deficit, whereas the client who's trying to build muscle is allowing a caloric surplus, and that's actually necessary for their goals. So you wouldn't want to mix these. So if the person wanting to stay super shredded, they don't want to be in a caloric surplus and have high carbohydrates. They're going to want to be in a calorie deficit. Now, can they still do carbohydrates in a calorie deficit and be super shredded? Absolutely. Bodybuilders do it all the time. You look at the overwhelming majority of bodybuilders who get on stage with the most amount of muscle and the leanest amount of body fat in combination as humanly possible. They're going to be allowing carbohydrates in their diets even when they're trying to get super shredded, because it optimizes performance. Optimizing performance in their training helps them sustain muscle tissue, so that way they can balance the goal of being lean and muscular. And if you remember in the question, he mentioned the body weight difference. So he was mentioning his friend, he assumes is around 160 pounds. This client, they were on stage at like 187. So in the off season, they're going to be hovering around 200, maybe 205. So you're talking about a very large difference. That's a 25% increase from the smaller person's body weight. So if they weigh 160 and you add 25%, which is 40 pounds, you get my client. So you're a 25% body weight increase, and that's going to be through muscle tissue and related water weight to the muscle tissue. But you're looking at two different goals of human beings. If the person who was 160 and shredded wanted to start building muscle to eventually get to, say a lean weight of 185, 190, or even more, they would likely need to allow some carbohydrates into their diet and or definitely loosen up the intermittent fasting component. So they're going to need to release some of the caloric control that they have with the two structures of the carnivore diet and the intermittent fasting, because they're going to need to get into a caloric surplus, and it's going to be very hard to get into a caloric surplus when you have timing windows restrictions and or you have food choice restrictions. So for example, a carnivore diet is going to be high in protein and dietary fats. Dietary fats are very slow digesting, so you're not going to be as hungry as often throughout the day. So if you need to eat more to grow, anything that limits hunger is going to potentially limit your intake, which can then potentially limit your muscle growth. So the diet structures are just simply different because the people have different outcome intentions. So that would be essentially the boiled down version of the answer. That's not really boiled down because I think I talked for like 10 minutes there. But that's boiled down for me. So you could definitely just go into like crazy nitty gritty detail on all three of these structures, considering carnivore diet and intermittent fasting are separate structures, and then a carb-based diet for muscle growth. So we could spend more time ripping these apart and talking about pros and cons, but that would be the general advice, is it depends on the goal. So if the people he's on the cruise with, my client is on the cruise with, if their goal is fat loss, they would, if they're given the option between these two, these are not the only options that I would ever suggest, but if they're presented with the options of what my client is doing versus what this other person is doing with carnivore diet and intermittent fasting blended, if their goal is fat loss, they should lean towards the carnivore diet and intermittent fasting. Now, are those the best goals for fat loss, like the best diet structures? Absolutely not. Not for everybody. It works great for some. It works horribly for others. So there are other options. But if they're presented with just, my client versus this other person, if their goal is fat loss, they definitely should do what the other person's doing. If their goal is muscle growth, then they should do what my client's doing. So it would really depend on what the intended outcome is, would then determine which advice the people listening on the cruise ship should listen to. Okay, so hopefully that was just a little bit of fun background information. Next question we have is, with all the misinformation present in social media, what is the worst nutrition advice you commonly see recommended? Okay. Usually the worst nutrition advice is when people say don't eat whatever, but then they don't tell you what to eat, and or they're only talking about specific foods and they never really mention amounts. We know that caloric amount is the most impactful component in nutrition. Meaning, even if you eat quote-unquote healthy foods, but you eat more calories than your body needs, you will eventually accrue some body fat and or you will impede the ability to lose body fat. So if you're eating in a caloric surplus, regardless of what you're eating, you're not going to lose body fat. And if you're in a caloric surplus but you don't have optimal protein percentage or amount, you're not really going to build muscle. You're just going to gain weight, which will be mostly predominantly body fat. Depending on supplementation, depending on whether you lift weights or not, will change the percentage of what you gain being muscle versus fat. But if you're in a surplus, you're going to gain something, whether it's fat or muscle or some combination. If you're in a deficit, you're going to lose something, whether that's fat or muscle in some combination. So we know that caloric amount is the largest determining factor of a diet being successful or not. Therefore, when someone's advice is, just don't eat this, that's not good advice, because by simply eliminating a food, it doesn't guarantee that the person is going to be healthier. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to be a calorie deficit. It really doesn't have any guarantees of anything. So one of the most common things I'll see is somebody says avoid processed foods. Horrible advice, because it doesn't define what processed foods are, and it then doesn't give you any specifics about what you should eat instead or how much you should eat of this or that, or there's really just nothing. I mean, that's pretty worthless advice. Is essentially what they're saying is don't eat crappy foods. Well, kind of no crap, like try not to cuss, but like duh is so I can't stand that advice. And unfortunately, where I hear that most commonly is from doctors. So I'll have clients who have met with a doctor, from whatever, whether a general practitioner, a hormone specialist, whatever, and they'll be like, oh yeah, they told me, to avoid processed foods, and I'm like, that's awful advice, horrible advice. And the reason why is avoiding processed foods, like, is that wrong? Should you actually go towards processed foods? There's a yes and a no to that. And the reason why there's even a possible of a yes is because of the lack of definition. A processed food is literally any food that required a process before it got to you, before you put it in your face. So unless you plucked it from a tree and ate it, and that's even processed because often while it was growing on the tree, there were, insecticides or some other things involved. The tree was cared for. It might have been like watered with, a water system that wasn't natural. So therefore that was processed. It was processed in its growth. So how it was grown was processed. So it's really, really, really rare nowadays that we would eat a food that didn't have some type of human influence. Therefore, if it has human influence, it's been processed. So the lack of a definition is just atrocious because it doesn't really define what in the world they're talking about. So I've had some clients, when they say, oh, I try to avoid processed foods, and I'm always like, ooh, I perk up and I'm like, well, in your mind, like, how would you define that? Because I think it's super fun to figure out, just to hear the difference in how people define very common terms, like I eat healthy. What does that mean? Good God. That could mean anything, is what I've found out. So processed food, some people will be like, yeah, I just don't eat candies and junk food. I don't eat sugar. And I'm like, well, do you eat fruit? And they're like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, then you do have sugar. It's just a different type of sugar than candy. Or they'll say, I don't eat processed foods, and they'll say like breads and pastas and bagels. And I'm like, oh, okay. But yet they'll, drink a soda. And I'm like, how is that not like, you're afraid of bread making you fat, but you'll drink soda? Like, what's going on here? So I usually find that the definition of processed per individual is pretty unique to each individual. There are some general, commonalities, but it's very rare. It doesn't exist, that across many people you'll find the exact same definition. So that is probably what I would consider to be the worst nutrition advice, is when somebody just tells you to avoid processed food. It's not necessarily that the advice is inherently bad. It's just so nondescript and undefined that it's basically useless. There you go. Okay. Next question. Would it be fair to say that GLP-1 drugs have the potential to indirectly be catabolic due to insufficient calorie intake and insufficient protein intake, thus making each meal increasingly more important to meet protein requirements? Yes and no to this. Whether you're taking a GLP-1 drug or not, if you're in a calorie deficit and you're not meeting protein, like minimum requirements, you're going to be losing more muscle tissue than what you would really ideally like. So you're going to be losing some body fat, but also some muscle mass. So that would be technically catabolic. Whether you're on a GLP-1 drug or not, if you're in too severe of a calorie deficit, if you have too insufficient of protein intake, it's going to be catabolic. You're going to be losing muscle tissue. Now, a GLP-1 can magnify that concern because a GLP-1 slows digestion, and thus it kind of like lowers hunger, and therefore you're more likely to be in a caloric deficit. And if you're not tracking calories and being purposeful, you're more likely to be in a severe or a too severe of caloric deficit. And if you're under eating food, you're likely going to be under eating protein, especially since typically people, when they're eating like maintenance level of calories, they barely get enough protein. And even when they're in a surplus of calories to build muscle, they barely get enough protein. Protein is usually something that people undereat or barely eat enough. Very rarely is anyone overeating protein. It does happen. It's just very rare. So most people, they undereat protein already. So then if you reduce their overall food intake, you're going to be reducing their protein intake, which then makes it likely that it's severely insufficient, meaning it's not going to be enough to maintain muscle mass. So GLP-1 drugs can contribute towards muscle loss, but not, it can happen without them, and it can happen with them. It's more likely to happen with them, sure, but it can also happen without them. But people can also take GLP-1 drugs and not be catabolic. I have many clients who take a GLP-1 drug either before we met and they were not getting great results and it was causing chaos, so then I kind of helped them figure out how to fix that and adjust that. Or they were wanting to lose a lot of weight, they ran into a lot of emotional problems, a lot of just issues, and we figured out a GLP-1 might be helpful for them to kind of curb some of those issues. So we might start a GLP-1 drug while we're trying to lose fat. And as long as we're controlling our calories, as long as we're controlling our protein intake, so calories are low but not too low, protein is high, but there's never really a too high, but it's high enough. And we're controlling that well, and the GLP-1 drug is underlyingly just help controlling cravings and kind of help balancing their emotional and mental mindset through the process, then great. So a GLP-1 drug doesn't automatically mean they're going to be catabolic. It can increase the likelihood that that could be happening, but it doesn't directly cause it. There, cool. Okay, the next question we have is a training question. We actually have two training questions. So the first is there a difference in how you would train an individual with rheumatoid arthritis versus degenerative arthritis? Both need low impact exercises, flexibility, aerobic exercises. But is there a difference in strength exercises? Are there exercises you should avoid, such as the leg press? Okay, rheumatoid arthritis and degenerative arthritis, we don't need to really specify a difference. That's mostly it's going to be controlled through nutrition. You can impact arthritic symptoms by regular exercise and mobility work, like they mentioned. You can basically, a person who is experiencing stiffness and pain in their joints, if they keep all other elements consistent and they add exercise, assuming it's not crazy, wildly intense, exercise, meaning it's an appropriate exercise for where they are in their life, exercise progression, it will make them feel better. Now, would you do exercise alone? Hell no, absolutely not. You would 100% want to address nutrition because that'll have an even larger impact than exercise. So if I had to pick between the two, I would address nutrition before I would address exercise. Nutrition is way more impactful, making sure they have enough calories, not too many, not too few, enough protein, make sure they have enough protein, and hydration. Typically, arthritic issues happen as you get older. And as we get older, we tend to consume less fluid. There's a lot of reasons for that. Reduced activity, reduced muscle mass, blah, blah, blah. Some people can have like incontinent issues, like where they just don't want to have to pee 1,000 times a day and or they don't want to, wet themselves. So they'll just restrict fluid during the day and only drink at night. That can further exacerbate the issues of arthritis. So we want to make sure we have proper calories, proper protein, proper hydration. And then there are some like inflammatory foods that you can find for individuals, and you would want to figure those out and kind of reduce those or eliminate those. So there's a lot you can do nutritionally. So that's what I would start with for sure. You can even take like joint-based supplements like a bodybuilder would take, and that would be great. That would be super helpful, making sure the body has the proper micronutrients it needs to manage the arthritic symptoms and issues. So that's all the stuff I would start with first. Now, if we're looking at exercise, one of the things they listed there was low impact exercises. This is interesting, is I believe that I know why a person would say low impact, because if they have joint pain and or, let's just say for ease of terminology, their bones are weak. Like high impact exercises, you would believe would be high risk, high injury. If you do them correctly, they're not necessarily that bad. So you can do like box jumps with somebody with arthritis if you wanted. I might jump up and like step down. I might not drop back down if they find that painful in their ankles and knees. But if you were to do like box jumps, and this is going to sound goofy, but stick with me here for a second. Box jumps of say like 4 inches, where you had them like jump on, jump off, jump on, jump off. And they're landing on their toes. They're bending their knees, bending their hips. They're doing everything appropriate for how it would be done. That's actually really good for developing bone density. So if we're improving bone density, improving connective tissue strength, muscle tissue strength around joints, you can actually do what will be considered high impact exercises as long as they're scaled to the individual's ability. I know why someone might list low impact as like a precaution, but I would hesitate, and I've done in my entire career. So I've been a personal trainer now. I started training people for money when I was 18. I'm 41. I started training people when I was 16, so it's been 25 years, but 23 years being paid for it. And I have always deferred to who is standing in front of me and what's best for them. So I know that there are general recommendations and guidelines, but at the end of the day, who's standing in front of me and what's best for them? So if I have somebody who's like, oh, I have arthritis and I used to be a college athlete and I really loved being athletic, but I know now I'm not allowed to run, I'm not allowed to jump, I can't really do explosive things and it's really depressing. I'd be like, bullshit, let's do it. There goes my cursing, my goal to not curse. But I'd be like, let's do it. Let's start with box jumps of 4 inches or 2 inches. I don't care. Let's just get you back to feeling like who you want to be. Let's take control of your body. Let's take control of your future. You're not dead, so why are we going to act dead? Let's do the things that we want to do. Let's just do them in an intelligent and progressive way. So that's how I approach it. Is that going to be 100% right for everybody? I think so. But I'll say that everybody has to find their own approach. That's just the approach that I like and what I've used over the years and what's allowed me to be successful and have fun and make a quality difference in someone's life other than just the physical difference. Like, I want them to be emotionally, mentally happy and live the life they want, have the body they want as much as we could possibly control. So I wouldn't put limitations on. When I would think about somebody with arthritis, I wouldn't train them any different than somebody without arthritis. Meaning, what are they capable of right now? What is one step above that we can kind of push their body into? And then with proper nutrition, sleep, hydration, supplements, their body can adapt and grow into that new range. So it's kind of like we're trying to expand the body. So if the body can only handle this much, we want to push it to this much, let it adapt. Push it to this much, let it adapt. Push it to this much, let it adapt. So if you have somebody who has physical concerns, such as arthritis, maybe you'll take smaller progressions than you would do with somebody without arthritis, but you don't take no progressions. You do want to push them to try to do things. And actually, the leg press, it's interesting that the person mentioned that in their questions. That's probably one of the best freaking things ever to use. I have had one of my clients, they had osteoporosis, like bone density issues, concerns. And they were going I think it was every 6 months or every year, they were going to a hospital in Raleigh, North Carolina to get bone density testing done. And it could do it specific in sections of the body. So we actually were trained together for a long time. It might have been 6 months or so, I forget, where we were doing leg press. And when they first started, they could only do like maybe 90 pounds. Eventually got them to like 200 pounds and they were kicking ass and feeling great. And then they went and got this bone density test that they had regularly scheduled. And their doctor was like, what in the hell have you been doing? Like, this is amazing. Your bones have actually gotten thicker. Your bone density isn't going down at the worse than normal age range because they had rheumatoid arthritis. It's actually not even going down normal to age range. It's not even just holding steady. It actually increased. And they were in their 60s. And they were like, well, I'm doing like weight training. I started getting a trainer. We're doing weight training. And they were like, well, what are you doing specific to your hips? Because their leg bones and their hip structure actually thickened. And they said they were doing the leg press. And there you go. So we were actually doing a leg press to help give more loading intensity onto the bones. There were actually, I'm sure they probably still exist, but they're not as popular in social media. But there are places you can go that actually have machines that apply isometric force to the body, meaning you get into a position and then this force like tries to compress you and you resist against compression. You resist against getting like moved. And if they compress the body, like if you get into this like leg press device and it tries to squish you and you're resisting that squishing, over time, these machines can actually dial up the degree of squish, tension, and these are all really technical terms, but they can dial that up. And what they've found is you can actually improve bone density. The body can absorb like 9 times its own body weight in regards to like compression forces. It's pretty wild. It's pretty cool. But there are entire like fitness places that you just go in and they have these machines that are isometric like compression machines, and it can help build bone density. It's pretty wild, pretty cool. You actually do build muscle tissue as well, depending on diet, depending on frequency and all these other things. But it's really cool to know that there's science around compression forces and how if we have proper nutrition, proper rest, proper micronutrients, we can actually build up our bone density, even like regardless of age, into like 60s, 70s, 80s. So my theory is always like, unless you're dead, there's something we can do. So if you're dead, then it's a bummer. We probably can't do much. But there's a lot of possibilities. So when I would look at somebody with any type of arthritis, I would progress them as I would set in mind to progress them as I would do with anyone, in the sense of trying to find out where their limitations are, be safe within those limitations, but test those limitations. So you might take like smaller progressions, you might take a little more precautions from here and there and in different moments, different positions, but I really don't believe there needs to be. You would just progress them as you would anyone else, meaning what is the best for this person standing here right in front of me. Therefore, what that kind of implies is I don't have standard forms of progression. Like if somebody comes in and they're dumbbell pressing 20-pound dumbbells for 10 reps, okay, in 4 weeks we're going to go to 25 pounds. In 4 weeks we're going to go to 30 pounds. In 4 weeks we're going to... You can't predict that shit. Like, there's no way you're going to predict that. So you just say, okay, how are they doing this week compared to last week? Can we do anything a little bit harder? And maybe we add one more rep. And that's it. Maybe across like 3 or 4 working sets, maybe 30, 40 reps, we're only able to add one. Who cares? That's fine. Take that and it's a win. Then the next week come in, try to add something. Next week, add something. Maybe the following week you increase range of motion and there's a little more stability. And you're like, you know what? We're not going to make a progression in reps or weight. We're just going to take the increased range of motion because we want to always be trying to perform exercises technically proficient. So if we can make a technical improvement, I'll take that over a weight load improvement or a rep improvement, like a rep count improvement. Always pursuing technique first. And then if you can add weight, then if you can add reps, that would be great as well. You can even reduce rest time. I mean, if they're really struggling to make any progression, say, hey, last week we rested 2 minutes between sets. Let's see if we do a minute and 45 seconds. Let's just figure out something we can do this week that's a little bit harder than last week, but we can still stay safe. That way it forces a progression. When you can't progress in a certain movement, maybe dumbbell chest presses, you go to dumbbell incline chest presses. You start a whole new set of progressions. Maybe you do a 15% incline. Then you do another set of progressions for like, say, 4 weeks at 30% incline. And then all of a sudden it's month like 4 and you go back to flat and you see like, holy cow, we can do 4 or 5 more reps. We can do 5 more pounds. So it's just really pushing them to make progressions as you would with any other client. But again, as you would with any other client, you do it best for what's in front of you, the person in front of you. There's no preconceived notion of what things need to be. You're not going to force something if it doesn't apply to that person. You're just going to take that person and say, where are your limits? How do we test them safely? And then let's do that every single time we come into the gym. Cool. Okay, next question. I'm currently following the muscle growth program. Woot woot. Can I switch the training days to prioritize my glutes and legs? Yes. So the structure that we have, one of the structures we have available is kind of like a push-pull legs kind of structure. So you do push, then pull, then legs, then push, then pull, then legs. Or you can do push-pull legs, upper body, lower body. There's a couple ways to structure that. So if somebody really likes and wants to prioritize their legs, they can do that first. So they can do legs, then push-pull, and then again, like lower body, upper body if they do 5 days, or it can be legs, push-pull if they do 6 days. You can really play around with that. If you're doing 4 days, it's probably better just doing upper, lower. But for that person, maybe they would do lower, then upper, then lower, then upper. But yes, you can rearrange the days. The days are set in the program just, as an option, and then you can certainly personalize that. And we have a lot of people sending personalization questions that I don't cover in the weekly Q&A because it's personal to them and maybe not really useful in a conversational, like a group conversation like this. But I figured this question was good just to note that you can rearrange the training days in most of the programs. And I don't think it's going to be an issue at all. It's going to help you prioritize maybe a way in which you want to train that increases your motivation, that'll increase your consistency and adherence to the program, and thus increase your results. So yes, you can actually switch around the training days if you'd like to prioritize whatever muscle groups you want earlier in the week. Cool. Next question we have is a mindset question. I often hear motivation is overrated, meaning that to be successful, a person needs to be disciplined, not motivated, meaning they have to do the right things consistently even when they don't feel like doing them. How do you develop and sustain discipline? Okay, it was never like automatic for me, and it's changed over the years. So if we're looking at, it says like, how do you develop? I'll answer for myself, then I'll answer like recommendations for clients. When I first started trying to be disciplined and change from quote unquote bad habits to good habits was when I was 15 years old. And for the first couple of years, my motivation was self-hate. I absolutely hated who I was. And I was like, if I do the same lazy bull crap, I'm going to be the same, lazy, crappy person. So I don't want to do that. So let me do anything but what I naturally want to do. So what my nature was to maybe do lazy stuff or avoid being quote unquote disciplined. So I was like, well, that got me to where I didn't want to be. If I want to be something different, I have to do different. So if I don't feel like eating, if I don't feel like, say, working out today, well, that made me a fat, lazy piece of crap, so I better work out so I'm not a fat, lazy piece of crap. So for me, self-hate worked for a while. I then realized that as I was making progress, I'm like, hey, this body's not too bad. And hey, I've actually been pretty disciplined lately. I've actually been doing a lot of the right things. I no longer am motivated by the fear of staying who I was. I'm now kind of motivated by becoming what maybe I think I can be. So before it was like, I'm really close to being the worst version of myself. Can I just be anything but that self? And then as I created more distance from that self, I started becoming like, well, who's on the other side? Like, who's on the other end of this? Where can I actually get to? What can I become? And then that became my driving force is, what can I achieve? What can I become? Who can I become? And it was exciting and motivating to think of, can I do this? Can I achieve that? I might have set a goal, like maybe one day I was like, I wonder if I can curl this bar 100 times before I put the bar down. And it's like, ooh, can I be a person who can do that? Well, the only way is to try. And if I fall short, the only way is to try again. And if I fall short, the only way is to try again. So I started being motivated by wanting to become greater than I ever thought possible. Now I'm using the word motivation because for me that is what I felt. And the discipline was never really a concern for me. It was because in order for me at first to not be who I was, I had to do things differently. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm disciplined because of this. It was just, I better do this because I don't want to be that person anymore. And then it became, well, I better do this because if I want to eventually figure out who I can become, how awesome I can be, I have to do this to figure that out. So for me, it was more like I had a vision of who I didn't want to be at first. I had a vision of what could I possibly become. And I just knew doing the things I needed to do to eventually find that answer needed to be done. So I just did them. It wasn't, I never thought of it being disciplined. It was just, this is what you do to get what I want. If I don't want to be a fat, lazy piece of crap, then I have to do what fat, lazy pieces of crap don't do. If I want to be a freaking awesome, amazing version of myself that I don't even know what's possible, I have to do things I've never done before. So I never thought of it as discipline. It was just, this is what I do if I want to get what I want to get. And that's still to this day kind of like my motivating force is what can I achieve? What can I become? In order for me to find that out, I got to do these things. Now, I will look at other habits in life because for me that might better relate to what a person struggles with exercise is think of like brushing my teeth or showering. Those are things that like does not having tooth decay something that motivates me on a daily basis to brush my teeth. Honestly, not really. I just brush my teeth because I'm supposed to. And if I didn't do that, my breath would probably stink, and I don't want my wife to be around stinky breath and have to kiss me in the morning or at night or not want to kiss me. So I just like it's better for the people around me, and it's better for the long-term health of my body if I brush my teeth. Same thing with showering. It's better for the people around me. It's better for my long-term health. It's what you do because you're supposed to do it, and it's good. I don't really question those kind of things. I don't know. Maybe that's unique to me. Maybe that's different. But those are just things you do because you're supposed to do them, and it's a good thing in general if you do them. If you miss a day or two here or there, does it really hurt you? No. And I'll just pick it back up when I can, that kind of thing. When it comes to nutrition and exercise, I don't accept missing a day. I have a very hard time taking a day off a week from weight training. It frustrates me. I still question whether it's productive or not because I'm like, well, I could still train my calves or I could train my abs or, maybe I could do a little bit of forearm work. My forearms still aren't big enough. Like I have a hard time taking a day off. Usually when I have to take a day off, I'll convince myself it's okay because people in general take days off and even amazing, wonderful bodybuilders. Like right now, my goal is to build muscle and be super lean. So I'm looking at what bodybuilders do. Some IFBB pros only train 4 days a week. I'm sure there are some that might only train 3 days a week. That's, good for them. I don't really like that and I don't want to do that. So I will struggle to find a way to train more often. But if I have to miss a day, I'm like, that's okay. Normal people in my sport and who I'm like relating what I do to, they take days off. So, 1 day off a week isn't going to kill me. But I am very aware of my habits when it comes to nutrition and exercise because it's a very slippery slope. And I've seen it with clients, thousands of clients over all the years, where one workout immediately turns into 3 months. If you miss one workout, all of a sudden 3 months you haven't worked out. That's how fast it feels. Just bam. So I'm very aware of it and I'm very careful to make sure I haven't taken a day off nutrition, I think, since I was 15. I mean, if I have a day where I eat, birthday cake, I'm doing it knowing, okay, I've worked out in the morning or I'll bring my calories down the next few days to counter it in this way. It's always a calculated decision. I haven't made I took in a day where I haven't made a calculated decision on nutrition since I was 15 years old because it's who I am. It's what I do. It's how I'm going to reach all my goals. Brr. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but that is how I relate to the terms motivation and discipline. When I look at clients, what I typically recommend they do is to focus on progression, not perfection, because often what limits their discipline, what demotivates them is they can't be perfect. Even people who have, pro cards in various aesthetic sports, bikini, figure, physique, women's physique, men's physique, classic physique, wellness, all the categories. Pros, like IFBB pros and drug-tested pros in aesthetic sports, they're not perfect. They make mistakes. You think about professional athletes make mistakes. Olympic Games athletes, I've worked with all these categories, they make mistakes. The people who are the best of the best still make mistakes from time to time. They are not perfect. They try to be perfect, I know that. But they aren't, and that allows us to know that, okay, if I make a mistake here or there, I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't, abandon all my goals and everything I've ever wanted to achieve because I made one mistake. I learn from that. I figure out why I made the mistake. I figure out if I can avoid that in the future, and I move on. So I tell them to aim for progression. Is whatever you did last week, try to do that or a little bit better this week. and do that for the rest of your life. And that is how you eventually develop discipline, is just, okay, if last week I got, so for clients, we would track, most average clients will track calories like within a range and protein within a range, or at least a minimum. And then we pay attention to distribution, meaning when do they have their calories and protein throughout the day. So I'll say, hey, last week we got 5 out of 7 days with our calories, 4 out of 7 with our protein, and 4 out of 7 where our distribution was correct. So 5 out of 7, 4 out of 7, 4 out of 7. So if you're happy with the progress you're making, let's repeat that. If you want to make better progress, we got to get better than those numbers somehow. So next week, if they do 5, 4, 4, we're like, hey, great, we sustained our progress. That's wonderful. If you want to make a progression, let's see if we can beat 5, 4, 4. Maybe the following week they only get like 4, 3, 3, and they're like, oh my gosh, like that was awful. I'm like, well, it was less than last week, but it wasn't awful. You still got 4, still got 3, and you still got 3. That's 10. You got 10 things right rather than 0. So it wasn't a 0. You got 10. So let's not get too depressed here. Let's just figure out why it wasn't a 5, 4, 4. Where did we miss some things? How can we be better prepared in the next time that comes around? So then we just apply those lessons and we move on to the next week. So I think what helps is focusing on progression, not perfection, and learning from our examples and understanding that this is a process that takes weeks and months and years, and hopefully the rest of your life you're going to try to be the best self. So we have your whole lifetime to go. So if I miss a meal, or if I miss a day, if I miss a week, if I miss a month, it's not that big of a deal. We just pick right back up when we can, and we keep going because we have our whole life ahead of us to do this. Cool. Okay, last question. If a trainer wanted to create an online training business, such as what you have, what tips would you give them? Whew, I could make a whole video series on that. Tips. It would depend on where you're starting from. If you're starting from, you have currently in-person clients, make sure you focus on them, make sure they're getting great results. And if you're wanting to convert them to online training, then start to space out your training sessions. Maybe if you meet with them twice a week, go to once a week and write out some workouts that they're supposed to do on their own. Then eventually you get that to twice a month, then once a month, then, none, and you're just doing it virtually. If you're wanting to transition away from in-person. If you're wanting to build on top of your in-person, then freaking crush what your in-person people are doing and get proof of what's happening that you can use on social media for marketing. Whether that's before and after photos, whether it's like PRs in the gym, maybe they send you a message about they're doing really awesome with their diet and they're super excited. Maybe they got a compliment from a family member or a friend, so you post that. Get rid of the personal details, so that way you're not sharing somebody's, deepest, darkest secrets. But get proof that what you're doing works, and then use that as social media marketing. And say in your marketing that, these are the results I'm getting with my current clients. If you'd like to become a client, no matter where you are, reach out in this way. So you can say like virtual training, like make sure you label that, make sure you make it known, make sure you, like without any doubt in the person's mind, that training with you virtually is an option and it can lead to such like these great results. So that would be a big tip, is to make sure you take care of who you have now. Focus on who you have now, because that's going to keep you in business as you then try to like build upon the business, and use the things you do with the people now as marketing. So if somebody asks you a question and you type out like a really awesome elaborate answer, copy paste that, put that on social media and say, this is the quality of help that I give my clients. If you'd like to be a client and you want to do virtual coaching, so just make it like little mini commercials. And that would be a great way to build that. Another thing is just making sure that how you would work with the people is as streamlined as possible. There are a lot of approaches. The approach I use, it definitely is not the most streamlined, but allows for the most customization. So that's why I choose that, because I will choose customization and quality of the service over the ease of the service. I try to make it as easy as I can, but it definitely isn't the easiest. So for example, I don't use like a hosting app for coaches where you can have all of your communication, all your programs, and your nutrition stuff, all that on like one app or website that a person would go to, and you manage the client entirely from that. The reason why is, number one, they charge more money than I want to spend. Number two is their exercise database is insufficient. So the way in which I rate programs, I pull from a collection of over 3,000 exercises. And I know all of them. I know that sounds like bullshit, but I've been doing this for my whole life, since I was 16 years old. If you name me any exercise, I'll be able to tell you like how to do it and what are like the pros and cons, the risk factors, all these things. So I have YouTube videos, tutorial videos for over 3,000 exercises. And when I write a client's program, I'll think, okay, well, let's say, okay, if I want them to do a barbell squat, maybe what's going to work really well for them, like for example, in one client's recent program, I wanted to correct when they would come down in a squat, their hips would lift, their chest and shoulders would kind of stay in place, and then that would come up. So what we did was we did paused concentric squats, meaning they went down, they came up, and it was about a third to half of the way, and paused, and then went up the rest of the way. The reason why is if they went down and they lifted their hips and left their shoulders in place and tried to pause, their body says, holy crap, this is awful. This is a lot of pressure on our lower back. All of our body weight is in our toes. This doesn't feel right at all. So it gives them this moment of feedback, this positional feedback that says, this is trash. We need to correct this. So very quickly the body says, oh, I need to keep my weight more on my heels. I need to externally rotate my knees as I come up, but not too much. So that way my knees aren't scooting forward. I want to make sure that I stay in this proper balanced position where I'm not too far forward, too far back. Everything's right kind of centered where it's supposed to be. You will find the most efficient position when you have to stop under a weight load. So we would do paused concentric squats. Then we would maybe the program, we would go into tempo squats. So they go down in 3, 2, 1, and then up in the same 3, 2, 1. So there's no longer a pause, but it's a slowed concentric, which allows them to still get that positional feedback, but it's more of a smoother movement, which will be what we need in the third program, which is we go back to regular squats, and now all of a sudden there isn't that weird little goofy hitch thing happening. I want to be able to choose those squat progressions, if that's what's best for that person. So pause concentrics, tempo squats, and then regular squats. But I get another client, and I might need a completely different set of progressions. I want to be able to use a platform that allows for perfect progression selection, perfect exercise selection for that individual, for their needs, and I have not found a hosting app that has a database as thorough as I would like it. So that is why I don't use it. Now that's my choice. You might choose to use an app, and it actually can be a really great way for starting trainers or beginner trainers, because it might be a database bigger than what you're aware of. So it might be a database that expands your current knowledge. And it's a platform that streamlines things, makes things a little bit easier. It actually maybe even tracks things you wouldn't have been aware to track, and you're like, oh, this is something I have to do. So really you can use it to learn the format of online coaching. Then as you grow, maybe you do eventually move away from that app because there's certain things you want to do that are more that aren't available in the app. But the app might be a great place to learn. So streamlining services, making the service easy for people, is something that I would definitely recommend. One of the ways I like to do that came up for me was using a Google Doc. When I first started doing virtual coaching or remote coaching, I would just have people email me when they have questions, or I would email them every week with updates. But then it's like, okay, if I want to look back what we did 2 months ago, I have to look back through a crap ton of emails and figure out where was the email in which thread that we talked about which thing and what numbers. And I was like, gosh, this is horrible. I can't find half the stuff I'm looking for. I know they're not going to be able to find it. So I started using Google Docs. My wife Meredith taught me about that because I didn't know technology very well. So she's been a huge help. So I use Google Docs because now it's just one continuous document. I have clients who have over 100 pages in their Google Doc, like we call it my journal. It's over 100 pages long. But I can do Control F and find anything I want. Or I can scroll back and say, oh, I remember in June we talked about da-da-da. So I just scroll back to the entry that's dated in June, read through one or two, find it, boom, move on. So I find that to be very easy, much more streamlined. So that's a couple recommendations I would give, is to market yourself, make it sure that you're well known, that virtual options are an option. and use your current people, invest in your current people as best as you possibly can, get the best possible results. They're going to increase word of mouth, and then you can also use their results as marketing, and then streamline the service, make it as easy as possible for people to be able to use, and that will reduce friction, which allows it to be a lot easier for them, and then they're going to have a better experience, they're going to have better word of mouth, and then you can use their results as marketing. So I think that's some good tips to start with. If you want any more personalization tips, just shoot me a message. I do business consultations. If you're a member of Patreon, I'm not saying, send me a message so I can charge you for a service. I'll answer your questions. That's the whole point of Patreon. But just so you know, or anybody else knows, I do business consultations and actually have helped develop over 10 actual facilities. Over half my clients are personal trainers, so I talk about this stuff all the time. So I'm very happy to help if you have any more in-depth questions. Okay, so that was all of our questions for this week. Again, if you would like to be able to submit a question, you can sign up to be a Patreon member at patreon.com/C3 method, and the 3 is spelled out THREE method. And you can also email me at any time at c3method@gmail.com. Again, the 3 is spelled out THREE. And then pretty much, I think that's it. So any way you can get a hold of me on social media, that would be great. We are on Instagram, we're on YouTube. I'm going to be bolstering my YouTube presence. That is one of my goals this year, is to put more videos on YouTube. We have our podcast going there. We have these weekly Q&As going there, but I want to start posting more content as well, like training content, nutrition stuff. So I'm working with Meredith to kind of get into a schedule and be able to get that as a routine as well. So you can find us every single day posting new things on Instagram under the name C3 Method. And you can definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel, and more content will be coming out in the upcoming months. And again, that's under C3 Method as well. Okay. Hopefully this was helpful, and thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.